They Didn't Teach This at Worm School by Simone Lia. One Worm's Tale of Survival. Chapter 1. My name is Marcus. I'm a worm, and this is where I live. Here's me. There's my bathroom, my music room. There's a spare room, bedroom, game room, second bathroom, closet. Oh, and my front door. My favourite colour is brown. That's because mud is brown, and I really like mud. My favourite things are other worms, and my hobby is digging holes in the ground. There is nothing I enjoy more than making a complicated underground tunnel system. But when I met Lawrence, everything changed. Let me tell you about how I met him. I was digging a hole, like I usually do, like all worms do, but I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing that happened was that I was flying a spaceship in outer space. The spaceship was made out of potatoes. Then I dreamed I fell out of a can and into a cereal bowl. Staring at me was a scruffy fat bird who looked a lot like a chicken. It was a really good dream until I got to the bird part. The bird had intense and menacing eyes. The worst part was that last part of the dream wasn't a dream at all. I really had been in a can, and there really was a big fat bird staring at me. What would you do if you were a worm and there was a bird 2 inches away from your face, looking at you with his beak open so wide that you could see his tonsils? Maybe you would do what I did. I smiled a big smile and said in my most cheerful voice, "Good morning." The bird looked confused. He mumbled, "Good morning," back, and then opened his beak again, with his head tilted at a slightly different angle. Before he could eat me up, I shouted very loudly and quickly, "My name is Marcus. My favourite colour is brown, and my hobby is digging holes in the ground. What's your name, and do you have a hobby, please, sir?" I added the sir at the end to be polite. The bird seemed taken aback. He closed and opened his beak. My name is Lawrence," he said. He was about to open his beak wide again. "And what about hobbies?" I asked. "Do you have a nice hobby, Lawrence?" Lawrence sat down, looked at his fat belly, and then looked at me again. "No one's ever asked me that question before," he said. "Really? Well, take your time and make yourself comfortable," I said, encouraging him to lie down on the sofa. I positioned myself a little closer to the window. "I'd love to hear all about your hobby. I'm sure it's very interesting." I didn't mean to keep shouting, but I was scared, and I didn't quite know what I was doing. Lawrence didn't seem to notice. He was obediently putting his feet up. "My hobby is travel," he said. "How fascinating," I said, trying not to shout as much. "And where have you been to?" Lawrence thought for a while. "That's the problem," he explained. "I haven't been anywhere. I'm terrible at map reading. I'd love to visit Kenya and Africa, but it's a long way to fly. I would definitely need a map to get there." I paused to try to give the impression that I was thinking deeply about what he was saying. "Why Kenya?" I asked. While he was thinking of his answer, I looked out the window. We were in a birdhouse in a tall tree. The latch on the window was too high for me to reach. Even if I could have reached up and pushed the window open, I wasn't too thrilled about wriggling down the tree from that height. They didn't teach us how to do that at worm school. Lawrence was looking at his belly again. Why did he keep looking at his stomach? Was it because it was large, or was it because he was hungry? I decided to keep talking to distract his mind from food thoughts. "Tell me what it is about Kenya that you love so much." Lawrence sat up. "I'll show you," he said, reaching for a glossy travel book from a pile of books on the floor. He opened it. "This is the Masai Mara National Reserve. Look at these beautiful wide-open plains. There are so many animals that live in the nature reserves in Kenya. You just don't see animals like that around here." Lawrence flipped through the pages with photographs of lions, elephants, zebras, and wildebeests. He stopped at a page that had pictures of pink birds with skinny legs. "This," he said, slamming his wing on the page dramatically, "is why I need to go." Lawrence looked at me. "Do you see what I mean?" Yes, I said, nodding in agreement, pretending to understand what he meant. Thank you. I'm glad that you see it too, that I'm actually a flamingo. A flamingo? I repeated firmly, trying my best not to laugh out loud. Lawrence doesn't look anything like a flamingo. That's a flamingo? Well, that's a picture of Lawrence. He looks like a chicken. I don't belong here with ordinary birds. I belong here. He paused to read the caption at the bottom of the photograph. In the Lake Nakuru National Park with other flamingos. That is my real home, and it is the only place where I can be truly happy. He slammed the book shut and clasped his wings together. The thing that stopped me from laughing at Lawrence was the fact that I was in a very bad situation. At any moment he would remember how hungry he was and slurp me up like a piece of spaghetti. I needed to use every part of my worm brain to come up with a cunning plan to escape from the birdhouse. There's a picture of me worm brain. I've got digging, maths, mud, more mud, some other mud, and ideas. Instead, I accidentally blurted out my worst fear. Are you going to eat me for breakfast? Probably not, said Lawrence, sighing. It feels funny to eat you for breakfast now that we've had a conversation. I almost felt relieved at this, but I was not reassured by Lawrence's use of the word probably. Keeping the conversation going seemed like a good idea. What's to stop you from flying to that park in Lake Nakuru? I asked. I told you, I can't read a map. I don't know the way, said Lawrence, standing up and facing the wall, unable to meet my eyes. I wriggled across the floor to where he stood and said softly, Lawrence, you must follow your dreams. If Lake Nakuru is where you belong, then surely there will be a way for you to fly there. There will always be a way. It suddenly felt like we were in a movie. It was an exciting movie. If Lawrence did fly to Kenya, then he wouldn't be able to eat me for breakfast, or lunch, or dinner. There must be a way, I continued. You just need someone to read a map for you. Lawrence sighed, then looked at me with those intense eyes. Tell me about your hobby again, he said, beckoning me to sit on the sofa. I was a little worried about the look in his eyes, but thought it might be best to keep talking. I like digging holes in the mud. It's very relaxing. I make escape tunnels to interesting places, like near a tree, so that I can eat apples that have fallen on the ground, or near the compost heap, which is fun. It's a bit like going to the beach. And don't you get lost when you're underground? Asked Lawrence, interrupting me. It must be quite dark down there. No, I always know where I am. I just kind of feel it. That's that, then, said Lawrence, laughing triumphantly and clapping his wings together. That's what? I asked, feeling quite worried again. You, Marcus, with your funny ideas and wonderful sense of direction. You can help me fly to Kenya. You can be the navigator. And to think I almost ate you for breakfast. Yes, I can be your navigator, I was shouting again. We were going to fly to Lake Nakuru National Park. I had no choice. It was either that or be eaten for breakfast. Chapter 2. Lawrence was packing for the long journey ahead. He was excited, singing and whistling as he hurried around his birdhouse. I sat on the sofa and looked out the window. It was a sunny day. I wished that I were outside, or at home, underground, or anywhere that wasn't here on this sofa, waiting to go somewhere I didn't want to go, with someone I didn't want to go with. There was no way for me to escape. I'd just have to fly to Lake Nakuru with Lawrence and start a new life. I'd send Auntie and Uncle a postcard when I got there, so they would know where I was. Here's a picture of a postcard. Dear Auntie and Uncle, I live in Kenya now. The weather is lovely here. Love you, Marcus. Number 1 Worm Street, Wormton, Wormshire, England. I'm just having a dust bath, shouted Lawrence cheerfully from the bathroom. I'll be ready soon. We're going to have so much fun. Yes, I said. I was really worried now. Not only did Lawrence think I could read a map, but he also seemed to think that I knew how to fly. Had he not noticed that I don't have wings? What would he do when he found out that I can't do that either? Lawrence was ready. He was carrying a big map and a small leather bag. Here, you'll need this, he said, throwing the map toward me, to figure out the route. I looked at Lawrence's bag. A thought popped into my worm brain. Do you have everything you need in that very small and tiny bag? I think so. I've got a book for reading, a big sandwich, and my blanket in case it gets cold at night. Oh, I said. What do you mean, oh? Asked Lawrence. Nothing. Well, it's just that. It's a long way, and you might get bored. Thought you might need some other things, you know, for entertainment. I see. Well, I could take my yo-yo. Would you need any of these travel books? What's this one? I asked, flipping through the pages. Yes, I'd better bring that one. It's about Paris. That's the Eiffel Tower. We'll probably see that on the way. And what about the television set? Do you think we'll need that? Yes, they might not have TV at Lake Nakaru. Oh, I hadn't thought of that, Lawrence said. In that case, I'd better take the computer as well, and the printer. You might need some warm clothes to wear, but I think it will be hot there. Well, you'll definitely need to take an electric fan then. Gosh, I exclaimed loudly. What? Asked Lawrence, looking worried. Toilets? What about toilets? Will there be any on the way? I don't know. I'd better take my own toilet, Lawrence replied quickly. And what about seating? I said, suddenly remembering to avoid food-related subjects. Lawrence looked at me and held his wing finger aloft. Do you mind waiting here while I pack some more things, Marcus? Not at all, I said. Take your time. Lawrence went into his bedroom. I could hear him opening drawers and cupboards. It sounded like he was pushing furniture around. Then there was a clanking noise coming from the bathroom as he disconnected the toilet from the pipes. When he returned, he was carrying much more than his little travel bag. Do you think I'm going to be able to fly like this, Marcus? I looked at him. Probably not, I said, shaking my head sadly. It might be better if you don't go. Lawrence laughed. Of course we're going to go. I probably don't need most of these things. We'll unpack again. Thanks for thinking of me, though, he said sincerely. No problem, I said, feeling a bit guilty. After several hours of unpacking and reconnecting the plumbing, we were ready to leave. Lawrence opened the front door. I don't know how to fly, Lawrence, I shouted up at him. Do you mind if I stay here? Lawrence laughed again. Silly, I know that worms can't fly. He bent his head down as an invitation for me to climb up onto the back of his neck. I wriggled up. Is that comfortable? He asked. Yes, I said, and I wasn't lying. I was surrounded by a million soft feathers. It was like sitting on a cloud in heaven. We were ready to leave. Chapter 3. I'm going to jump from the platform now, Marcus, and then we're going to fly up through the tree. You might feel some leaves brushing past you as we go. Are you ready for that? Okay, I'm ready, I said, closing my eyes. Hold tight, he said. I could feel Lawrence take a hop and then a leap. He flapped his wings noisily as we flew up into the tree. Twigs and leaves hit me in the face. I clenched every part of my worm body tightly. After what seemed like ages, I opened my eyes. We'd flown up into the sunny blue sky. Just to remind you, in case you've forgotten, I am a worm. I usually spend my time in the dark under the ground, but now I was sitting on this super soft flying bird cushion up high in the sky. When I looked down, I could see the trees and the houses below getting smaller and smaller. I felt so many things at once. Amazed, excited, and terrified. Part of me wanted to take a little nap and forget that this was happening, and another part of me wanted to be sick. My worm's stomach felt really funny all of a sudden. Are you okay? Lawrence asked. I couldn't speak. The wind was flapping against my face. If you feel a little funny, look at the horizon, Lawrence shouted. Please try to not throw up on me. I stared ahead at the green and brown fields. Looking at the view made my stomach forget that it was upset. When you're ready, Marcus, open up the map and tell me which way we need to fly. We have to head south towards France. See if you can find the way to Paris. "Okay," I shouted back. There was a lot of things to think about. I was almost getting the hang of this flying business. I unfolded the large map, suddenly feeling confident about my new job as navigator. Immediately a gust of wind caught the map and tossed it into the air. I watched it become a small square speck in the distance. That's the end of my navigation career, I thought. Without a map, I was of no use to Lawrence. What would he do when he found out? Would he eat me for his lunch? Or maybe he'd keep me for his dinner? There was not a lot I could do until he made a decision about when to eat me. Until then, I may as well relax and enjoy the ride, I thought, snuggling deeper into Lawrence's soft feathers. "We need to cross the English Channel first. Have you seen it on the map?" Lawrence asked. "It's blue." Oh, yes," I lied. "It's on the right." Lawrence turned his body and we flew towards some bright yellow fields. That worked pretty well, I thought. I could see a horse in a far-off field galloping in a pasture. "Fly toward the horse and then turn left," I said. Lawrence changed direction again. It was great. Lawrence was doing everything that I asked him to do. This was better than flying a potato in my potato spaceship dream. "Fly higher!" We went up and up until I could hardly breathe. "Lower!" I said, and we flew so low that the grass swished against Lawrence's fat belly. "Now do a loop-the-loop!" Whee! That was a good one. Afterward I had to concentrate on the horizon again. Lawrence didn't question any of my instructions until I said, "Now fly backwards." "Does the map really say that?" Lawrence called up to me. I've got a funny feeling about this, Marcus. You do know how to map read, don't you?" I didn't say anything. I was a little bit worried that he might change his mind about eating me for breakfast if I told him the truth. Lawrence turned around to look at me. "You don't even have the map!" He was angry now. "That's it!" When I'm sad or frightened, I like to burrow into the earth. It's very calming and relaxing being in the ground, surrounded by lovely, cool, safe mud. Forgetting where I was, I flopped over and dug into Lawrence's soft, feathery wing. But digging a hole in the ground is not the same as digging a hole in the sky. I found this out the hard way. One moment I was comfortably perched on Lawrence's back, immersed in a million soft feathers, and the next moment there was nothing there at all. It was just air, and I spun and tumbled, free-falling speedily toward the broccoli-looking trees. I closed my eyes and tried to multiply 2,657 by 6,765 in my head. I'm not sure if I did figure out the answer, because the next thing I knew, I was sleeping in a very comfortable bed that felt like it was made out of mashed potatoes. I opened my eyes. Lawrence was looking at me. There was no mashed potato bed. I was lying on my back in the grass in a field. "Where are the mashed potatoes?" I asked Lawrence sleepily. "There are no mashed potatoes. You must have been dreaming. Are you okay?" he asked with a worried look on his face. "I think so," I said, sitting up. Lawrence folded his wings across his front. The worried look went away and he was angry again. "You told me you knew how to map read." "No, I didn't," I said. I'd said things to Lawrence that weren't quite true, but I was sure that I hadn't said I could map read. "You did." "No, I didn't." I was beginning to get angry. "You're really mean, Lawrence. I don't want to be here any more. I'm going home." I got up from my bed of grass and wriggled farther into the field. I wanted to get away from Lawrence as fast as I could. "Poof! You don't even know where you're going," Lawrence called out to me. "Yes, I do," I said, lying again. I didn't know what to do. I was lost, but I couldn't turn back. I wriggled some more and stopped to think, pretending that I was admiring the view. As I was pretending to admire the view, I noticed that there actually was a view, and it looked oddly familiar, just like the cover of Lawrence's Paris guidebook. Was it? It was! The Eiffel Tower! "Lawrence," I said, forgetting that I was upset with him. "What? Are you going to admit that you're lost?" "I'm not lost. I know exactly where we are." "No, you don't." "I do. We're in Paris." "No, we're not," he said, hopping over to stand next to me. We both looked at the Eiffel Tower. "Oh," he said with bright eyes and a smile on his beak, "so we are!" The sun was setting, casting a long shadow on this famous landmark. It was spectacular. Chapter 4. We'd been looking at the Eiffel Tower for some time. It didn't look exactly like the picture in the book. The shape was similar, but there was something that seemed different. At the top, there were tight wires that connected it to other Eiffel Towers. There were Eiffel Towers everywhere, as far as the eye could see. Things must have changed since the photo in the book was taken, I thought to myself. "That's progress for you," I said out loud by accident. I wriggled my way over to the Eiffel Tower to get a closer look, and Lawrence hopped after me. We stood beneath it, looking up. "I must have taken a special shortcut. It didn't seem to take that long." Lawrence laughed without opening his beak. "Yes, it took no time at all. I don't even remember flying over the channel." "I think that we did. I saw some ducks," I replied, pleased that Lawrence seemed to have forgotten about the map fiasco. "Oh, I thought there was a pond," Lawrence said. He opened up his little bag, which had been tucked into his feathers. He took out an itchy-looking blanket and shook it roughly. The blanket must have reminded him of the map that I had lost, because he suddenly remembered that he was angry. "I'm still upset with you," Lawrence said. "You made me think you were good at map reading. It's only by luck that we ended up here in Paris. You're just as bad at directions as I am." He lay down on the ground and pulled the blanket over him so that it was tucked under his beak. "I wish that I'd stayed at home." "Well," I said, lying down next to him, "I didn't even want to come. I'd much rather be at home too." I pulled some of his blanket toward me and turned my back on him. "Good night," I said angrily. "Humph, good night," he replied, taking the covers back again. We had travelled a very long way. The sun had set, and the stars were shining through the blackened sky. I thought about a plan for the next day. I'd get up early before Lawrence woke, and had time to think about what he might eat for breakfast. Then I'd have a look around, check out all the Eiffel Towers, and seeing if there was anything else of interest in Paris. I'd send a postcard to everyone back home to let them know that I'd be living here now. Then I'd take French lessons and begin my new life here in France. I began counting the stars. On the 484th star, I fell asleep. Chapter 5. I slept deeply that night under the stars. Early the next morning, I stretched my worm body and yawned a great big yawn. I opened my eyes, expecting to see Lawrence's grumpy face, an itchy blanket, and a row of Eiffel Towers in a field. But there was no field, and there were no Eiffel Towers either. Lawrence and I were not lying beneath an itchy blanket. We were both sitting on a leather sofa, and next to us was a mole with long, sharp claws, and he was gently stroking the arm of the sofa. I looked at Lawrence for some clues as to what might be happening. He had an expression on his face that I'd not seen before. My worm instincts were telling me that something was not right. The evil-looking French mole, Lawrence, and I were in some sort of shelter. It was pretty dark in there, but when my eyes adjusted to the dim and smoky light, I could see that the roof and the walls were made of cardboard and plastic bottles. The floor was bare soil. A scrawny squirrel with terrible teeth stood at the opening of the shelter, staring at me and cleaning her front teeth with a twig. A creepy-looking crow was on the other side of the door. He was using a wooden spoon to stir the contents of a large metal pot that was balanced over a fire. I'd like to go home now, please," I whispered to Lawrence. "You need to be quiet, Marcus. Just try to act normal," Lawrence whispered back very loudly. The mole overheard our conversation. He seemed to understand English. "Relax, Marcus. You chicken bird. We're making breakfast. It's going to be a delicious stew." He spoke perfect English. "I don't like stew," Lawrence blurted out. "You'll like this one," said the mole. "It's a chicken and worm stew." He laughed, and then the crow and the squirrel laughed too. Neither Lawrence nor I laughed at his joke, because we both knew that he meant us, even though Lawrence wasn't a chicken. "I think that I need to use the bathroom now," Lawrence said loudly. Everyone stopped laughing. The crow dropped the spoon into the pot. He moved over to block the doorway. The squirrel stood behind him with her arms folded. She was chewing vigorously on her twig. "You don't need to use the bathroom," said the mole firmly. Everyone looked at Lawrence. Lawrence thought for a moment. "You're right," he said softly. "It was a false alarm." No one said anything. Lawrence was now gently rocking backward and forward on the seat, cradling his head in his wings. I daydreamed about being somewhere different. It would be very nice to be wandering around Paris right now. Perhaps riding a bicycle, with a wicker basket on the front that held a freshly baked baguette. Ding, ding. Then I remembered that I didn't know how to ride a bicycle, and then I remembered where I was and whom I was with. Ever since I'd known Lawrence, all that he had ever brought me was trouble. First he almost ate me for breakfast, and now, because he looked like a chicken and I happened to be sitting next to him, I was going to end up as lunch. It was like a bad luck charm. I needed to get away from him, and as far away from that cooking pot as possible. An idea floated into my worm brain. I cleared my throat. "Excuse me, Mr. Mole, I was thinking about your stew. Do you mind if I give you a tip to make it taste even better?" "Why should I listen to you about cooking tips?" he said gruffly. I turned to look at him and said, "My uncle is a chef." "Oh," he responded. "Go on then. Give us some of your uncle's chef tips." "Well," I began, "if you're cooking with chicken, then you have to add some leeks. Chicken and leek stew tastes like you're having your heart hugged. Would you like your heart to be hugged?" "A stew can hug your heart?" "Oh, yes, it can, if it has enough leeks and lots of cream." The mole scratched his chin with his claw. I do like cream, I do like hugs." "And secondly, you probably know this already, but when you cook worms, you have to add tarragon. You know about tarragon, don't you? It's an herb. You do have some for stew, don't you?" The mole looked at the squirrel, and the squirrel looked at the crow, and the crow shook his head. "No, we don't," said the mole. "Oh," I said, shaking my head too, pretending to be sad that they didn't have any tarragon. "What?" asked the mole. "Well, if you add worm without the tarragon, it's going to ruin the flavour of the whole stew. And if it ruins the flavour of the stew, then you won't get that hug in your heart." "But I want my hug," the mole, standing up. The squirrel and the crow nodded in agreement. "We just won't add the worm, then." He sat down again and folded his arms. My plan was working. I was just about to offer to go and dig up some leeks when Lawrence opened his great big beak. "Excuse me, everybody," he said, "but I'm not actually a chicken. I'm a flamingo. Thank you very much. I shouldn't be in the stew either." "We all know that flamingo doesn't go with leek." "You're not a flamingo. Don't tell me lies. I hate lies," said the mole, catching on to what was happening. "I'm not lying. I never have been and never will be a chicken." "You are a chicken." The mole shook his head. "You two rascals are making my head spin." "Who? Me too?" I asked innocently. "Yes, especially you, you sly worm, trying to trick me so that I won't put you in the stew. I almost believed you when you said you have an uncle who is a chef." I couldn't look at the mole. He was right. My uncle isn't really a chef. He's a waiter. "Right," the mole growled. "We're going back to the original plan. We're going to have chicken and worm stew." He composed himself and continued talking in a smooth voice. "We'll wait for the water to get a little hotter, and then you two will have a nice hot bath." The squirrel dropped some fresh vegetables into the pot. "You'll like that, won't you?" "Yes," we both said, playing along with the mole's strange game of pretending that he was nice. "I really like hot bath with onions, carrots and potatoes," Lawrence added. We were back in the same terrible and hopeless situation. What made things worse was that the mole was sitting awfully close to me. So close that I could smell his breath through my worm skin. It smelled like he'd eaten a whole raw onion, as if it were an apple. As each minute passed, the smell became more and more unbearable. I had to do something to get away from the stench. While we're waiting for the water to boil, let's all get up and dance, I suggested.
That's a great idea, said Lawrence, standing up and wiggling his hips awkwardly.
Sit down, said the mole. There's no music, you feathered imbecile.
Lawrence sat down and looked at the floor.
Such a ridiculous idea, said the mole, looking at me. How do you expect us to dance without any music?
We can make our own music, I said. The mole was about to start complaining again, but I talked over him. Squirrel, you can lay a beat for me, can't you? I need an 8-beat. The squirrel shot a glance at the crow. She was confused.
What are you doing? Whispered Lawrence loudly enough for everyone to hear.
It's called beatboxing. It's like this. I pursed and flapped my mouth to make drum beat sounds. As I did it, I had to take in deep breaths of onion air. I could now taste the onion as well as smell it.
Can you do that for me, Lawrence?
Lawrence started trembling. I made the sounds again and wriggled my body to the beat, trying to ignore the onion smell. No one responded at first, but I kept going. Boots, boots, boots. After a while, the crow began to nod his head to the rhythm. The squirrel tried to make the same sound as me, but her teeth made it hard to pronounce the boo sound, and it came out to tss, tss, tss.
That sounds like a snare drum, I said, trying to encourage her. I was very good at being a beatboxing teacher.
The squirrel smiled, showing her awful teeth.
Let me have a try, said the mole, standing up.
Boo, 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 boo. It sounded like he was blowing a raspberry.
That, Mr. Mole, I said, sounds a lot like a bass drum. Give us a boo on the first and second beats. See if you can do it from over there, I said, pointing to the opposite side of the shack so that we would all have a break from his onion breath. The crow joined in and gave a caw on the third and seventh beat. Okay, so we'll all come in now on a 5, 6, 7, 8. Everyone was making a boo or a tss or a boo noise, and we were all moving to the beat. Now it's time for us to do some dancing. If I managed to get everyone dancing, then I might just be able to escape unnoticed. This move is called the worm. I threw myself down on the ground and raised and dropped my body across the floor. Can anyone else do that? The mole, squirrel, and crow had fully immersed themselves in the music. They were tapping their feet and clapping their claws, paws, and wings. I'm dancing, said the crow, waving his wings enthusiastically. My plan was working. Lawrence stood up to get a better view. The crow hopped toward us, and we all moved outward to create a circle around him. He paused momentarily and then began hopping and shuffling his feet to the rhythm. Great moves, Crow! Can anyone else do that? I asked. Let me try, said the squirrel. She danced her way to the centre of the circle. The crow hopped backward to make space for her. She wobbled around the circle with her elbows sticking out. My turn now, said the mole impatiently. He waddled to the middle and then swung his little arms from side to side while hopping from one foot to the other. He didn't have a very good sense of rhythm. Everyone was mesmerised by the music, hopping and skipping around with their eyes closed. Everyone except Lawrence, who stood stiffly in the corner. A goose and some ducks heard us, and they came into the hut. The dancing had become more ambitious. The squirrel leapt and did the splits in mid-air. The ducks were quacking, and the goose did a backflip that accidentally tore apart the whole shack. We were now standing in an open field. I just needed to get Lawrence dancing with his eyes shut too, and then I'd be able to fully escape from everyone. Lawrence, can you do a tap dance? I asked, as I did the worm across the ground. You saw before, I'm not very good at dancing, he said, folding his wings together. Tap dance now, I said loudly while staring into his eyes. Lawrence hopped swiftly to the middle of the circle. He tapped and shuffled his feet with great precision at an incredible speed. Everyone stopped what they were doing to look at him. Tip, tappity, tip! He was an amazing tap dancer. I felt proud of him. I couldn't dwell on that now, though. It was my moment to run away. The soil was soft and perfect for digging, but as much as I wanted to be free, there was something stopping me. It's true that Lawrence had been a bad luck charm, but it felt funny now to leave without him.
I'd sort of agreed to be his friend, and maybe being friends with him was a good idea. I started to make a list in my mind of the pros and cons of being friends with Lawrence. I got as far as he's really good at flying, which was on my list of pros, when I realised that the dance area was full of worms. They had burrowed their way up from underground. They must have mistaken Lawrence's tap-tip-tappity footsteps for the sound of rain. In worm society, when it rains, we all rise to the surface. It's just something we do. Lawrence had no room to dance. The mole was agitated, and I missed my moment to run away. "Stop the beatboxing music!" the mole shouted, waving his claws about. Everyone stopped their puffing and looked at him. The dance party was over, and the mole was very, very angry.
Chapter 6. "Stop the dancing! Stop the music!" the mole said again, waving his claws in big circles in the air. "Something is going on here, and I don't like it." He looked at all of us. "Which one of you wigglers is Marcus?" "I am Marcus," said a worm who wasn't me. "All right, get him," said the mole. "Throw him in the pot. The water must have boiled by now." The squirrel and the crow pushed their way through the throng of worms. "I am Marcus," said another worm who wasn't me either, and was standing on the opposite side of the crowd. The squirrel and the crow looked at the mole to see what to do next. The mole was standing on tiptoe to see whose voice it was. "You can't both be Marcus," he said angrily. "Which one of you is the real Marcus?" One of the pretend Marcuses gave me a friendly wink when the mole wasn't looking. I giggled and looked at Lawrence to see if he was finding this funny too. Lawrence's eyes were bulging out of his head again. He looked really confused. Another worm spoke up. "I am Marcus." Then another, and then all the worms pretended to be me one by one. "All right, that's it," said the mole. "Put them all in the stew pot." Everyone started screaming. The crow hopped into the crowd and tried to scoop everyone up with his wings. The worms wriggled, wiggled, and burrowed quickly into the earth. The goose and the ducks flew away, quacking and honking. There were wings and feathers everywhere. Through the commotion, I could see Lawrence pick up a worm in his beak. He flew up into the sky. The crow looked at me. I was the only worm left. Before he could reach me with his feathery grasp, I dived into the soil, burrowing as quickly as I could. I dug down into the earth, deeper and deeper, further down than I'd ever been before. I only stopped digging when I was too exhausted to move another millimetre. "It's very quiet down here," I said out loud, even though there was no one around to hear me. I'd forgotten how quiet it was underground. It's a long way from home, too. I felt anxious. Without Lawrence, I didn't have anyone to talk to, or any idea how to get back home. Even with Lawrence, I wasn't sure how I would get back. I was stuck here, in France, all on my own, forever. I became angry. How dared Lawrence fly off with another worm? We were supposed to be in this together. Surely Lawrence couldn't have mistaken that other worm for me. We looked nothing alike. I'd known Lawrence since yesterday. Did he think that all worms looked the same or something? Maybe he didn't mistake me for another worm. Maybe he thought he'd try his luck finding a better navigator. What kind of friend drops another friend like that? How could he be so selfish? I shouted the angriest sentence I could think of. "You stinker!" No one could hear my angry words. I was totally by myself. I'd become used to Lawrence's company and to his just being there. Even though he could be trouble, mostly he was easy and fun to be around. I missed him. I really, really missed him. And it wasn't just because he had those sandwiches tucked away in his feathers and I was hungry. Just then there was a muffled shuffling noise coming from above me. "Gwenda!" A head appeared from a freshly made hole in the ceiling of my mud chamber. It was one of the worms. She opened and closed her eyes. "Is that you?" she asked, looking at me with a big smile on her face. She spoke excellent English. Everybody in France seemed to. "No, it's me," I said, making an effort to try and speak her language. I'm the real Marcus."
"Oh," said the worm, her smile disappearing. She sighed heavily. "A fat bird who looked a little like a chicken took Gwynder away. We heard you shouting and thought that you might have been her. We were hoping that he had dropped her and that she'd come back."
"It's only me, I'm afraid. I know that fat bird you're talking about. It's Lawrence. He wants to go to Lake Nakaroo, and he probably expects Gwynder to navigate. You won't see her again," I said, snorting.
"We won't see Gwynder again?" the worm repeated slowly. "We love Gwynder."
I felt guilty for being so flippant.
"Where's this Lake Nakaroo?" she asked. "We'll have to go there so that we can bring her back home."
I couldn't bring myself to tell her where Lake Nakaroo was. The only way they'd be able to get there was by making friends with some other birds who wanted to travel with worms and not be tempted to eat them for breakfast. That wasn't very likely.
"Where is Lake Nakaroo?" the worm asked again with a worried voice.
"It's in Kenya, in Africa," I whispered softly.
"Africa? But that's miles away. She's not going to know the way to Africa."
I couldn't think of anything to say. We were both silent for a while. I started thinking about Robert the Bruce. We learned about him in history at worm school. I don't remember most of the story, but the best part was when everything was going wrong for Robert, and he had to live in a cave to get away from the bad guys. He was so bored that he ended up watching a spider trying to make a web. The spider kept falling down, but each time it would climb up and try again. Eventually, after a ton of tries, the spider finished its web. This little spider inspired Robert the Bruce to never give up. I think he went on to do something important, but I can't remember that part of the story. I just remember the spider part. Robert the Bruce once said, "If at first you don't succeed, try again," I said to my dangling worm friend. I wasn't sure why I said that to her, but it must have been just what she needed to hear. She looked at me with a sense of determination and said, "Follow me." Sometime later, I stood with her among the circle of worms in a field. We were wearing stylish hats that had been decorated with twigs and dangly things. One of the worms was arranging sticks in the middle of the circle. "This will help us get Gwynder back," he explained in a serious voice. I looked at the sticks on the ground. "Come back, Gwynder." "Without further ado, let the ceremony begin," he announced. All of the worms started wriggling in a circle around the twigs. I didn't have time to think about what I was doing. I just joined in. We were all chanting, "Come back, Gwynder, come back, Gwynder, come back, Gwynder." As we went around and around in circles, I wondered if I was wearing a twig hat on my head. I wondered if I would be wearing a twig hat on my head while chanting if I were back at home. I thought to myself that I would have laughed at these guys and said that they were all off their rockers. But here in France, I didn't have much choice but to try and blend in with the locals, even if they happened to be total weirdos. I don't know how long we've been chanting. It might have been 30 seconds, or it could have been 3 hours. But I came out of my trance-like state when a worm, wearing a fashionably dainty hat, tilted her head back and said loudly, "Here she comes!" We all looked up. A plump worm was falling from the sky. We watched as the worm grew bigger and bigger as she got closer and closer until she finally whomped into the ground before us. "It's Gwynder," said one of the older worms. I couldn't believe it. I'd never seen anything like it. No one else seemed surprised. Everyone gathered around her. "Now we will give thanks," a big worm said. We began circling again. This time we had to chant, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Gwynder opened her eyes and sat up. She was shaking. We all wriggled a little closer. "Are you all right, Gwynder?" asked a worm with so many twigs on her hat that you could barely see her eyes. "Yes," said Gwynder. "A scary chicken bird thing picked me up in his beak. I thought that he was going to eat me. He flipped me up in the air and I landed on his back. I was terrified. Here's a picture of me in the bird's beak. He was talking to me as if I were old friends, saying all sorts of nonsense. He was going on about how he didn't want the crow to put me in the stew pot, and that he was sorry for being selfish about going to Africa. He said he was going to help me get back home to my worm life of digging holes in the mud. I thought to myself, if you were that worried about me, why did you take me away in the first place? Listening to Gwenda speak, I realised that Lawrence thought she was me, and he was being kind and offering to take me home. I wanted to take back all the horrible thoughts that I'd had about him. I wished that I hadn't called him a stinker. I suddenly really liked Lawrence again, and wished that he was here. He was kind. I wanted to try and be like him. If he were here, I thought, I wouldn't let him take me home. I'd really navigate us to Lake Nakuru. That's where I really wanted to be, after all. Gwenda was still talking. And then he was saying, Marcus, Marcus, can you hear me? Marcus, have you fainted? And then I said, I'm not Marcus, I'm Gwenda. But when I lost my balance and fell out of the sky, I saw your pile of come-back Gwenda twigs and somehow managed to fall toward them. That was probably the best part of this terrifying experience, and I'll be honest with you, I wouldn't mind doing that part again. As I was falling, he was still going on. He apologised first for stealing me and then dropping me. He said that if I see Marcus, I should tell him that Lawrence is looking for him. Everyone looked at me. You've got to find Lawrence, they said in one voice. I sighed. How can I find him? Look up at the sky. It's huge. The world is big, and I'm just a small and lowly worm. There's no point in even trying. I sighed again, a much bigger one this time. I've got one word for you, said my underground upside-down dangling worm friend. Robert the Bruce. I didn't want to correct her by saying that was 3 words. I knew what she meant. I couldn't give up. You're not on your own in this big world. You've got us, and we'll help you. I was really glad to have met these French worms. They were kind and helpful. I liked them even though they were weirdos. Chapter 7. I was at the top of an unusual tower. My French worm friends had come up with a plan to help Lawrence find me. I would not have been doing something as strange as this if I'd been back at home. But there was something about these guys and their firm belief that anything was possible that made me believe that this was going to work. One of the worms had placed a crown of twigs on my head. I wondered if Lawrence would like my fancy new hat. Just as I was thinking that thought, I heard a loud swoosh, and I was suddenly swept up into the air in a bird's beak. I used all my strength to twist around to see who it was. It was Lawrence! Hanging upside down, my twiggy crown fell from my head. The twigs detached themselves from the hat, and one by one they tumbled and landed on the ground. Thank you. It was a perfect way to say goodbye to my lovely and unusual friends. The worms hopped and beamed big smiles up at me. Lawrence glided and landed in a nearby field. He was out of breath and his feathers were ruffled. I've been looking everywhere for you, he wheezed. Are you all right? Yes, thank you very, very much for coming to get me. I took the wrong worm by accident, and then I was worried that the crow might have thrown you into the pot. Lawrence took a cheese sandwich from his feathers. He was leaning against a log, trying to catch his breath while eating his sandwich at the same time. Would you like to share this? He asked. Yes, please, I said. We ate in silence. The sandwich had pickled onions in it. I love pickled onions. I really ought to take you back home, said Lawrence, standing up. I'm sorry for making you map read and be the navigator for me. I don't exactly know the way back, but I'll make sure that you get safely home. It's a sensible and right thing to do. No, I said, squinting as I looked at Lawrence. He was standing in front of the sun. I want to do something for you. You've been so good to me. I've thought about it, and I know how much it means to you to travel to Lake Nakuru and be with the flamingos. I'd like us to continue travelling there together. No, said Lawrence. I really need to take you home. It would be very silly of us to continue with our journey when neither of us knows the way. I've caused you too much trouble already. I couldn't believe it. Lawrence was thwarting my attempt to be kind. How dare he try to stop me from being nice? Did he not realise how difficult this was for me? It was really rude of him to say no when I was offering something as big as this. I wasn't going to let him stop me. I insist we go to Africa. Oh, said Lawrence. He looked at his stomach. I can't believe you're saying this. I don't know what to say. Do you really think that we will be able to find our way to Lake Nakuru? Is that even possible? I hadn't actually thought about whether it was possible. I started panicking. I was so desperate to try and be kind that I'd forgotten that I didn't actually know the way. Getting to Paris was just a fluke. There was no way we'd ever find Lake Nakuru. Of course it wasn't possible. The whole trip had been one disaster after another. I was just about to suggest that we do the sensible and right thing and go back home when Lawrence said, I accept your kind offer of travelling with me to Lake Nakuru. We didn't know the way to France, but together we made it. Marcus, you are amazingly kind friend. I'm so glad that I met you. It might just be the best thing that's ever happened to me. He gave me a warm smile. I tried to smile back at Lawrence, but it took a lot of effort. I felt as though my face were covered in mud that had been baked by the sun. Lawrence didn't seem to notice. He was hopping around with excitement. We'll go to bed now, and we'll get up very early to fly to Africa, he said while bouncing in the air. Hooray, I said in a monotone voice with my mud-baked smile. I was too exhausted to think about what to do next. My worm brain had been through too much in one day. Lawrence lay down on the long grass, ready to sleep. He offered me his feathery armpit to nestle my weary head in. I took him up on his offer, and he covered us both with the itchy blanket. Although the sun was still high in the sky, as it was only early afternoon, and although I had tons of fresh problems for my brain to solve, I fell into a deep and heavy, uninterrupted sleep. Chapter 8. When I woke up early the next morning, it was still dark. Lawrence was talking to himself and hopping about, getting his things together. I remembered that I'd agreed to navigate our way to Lake Nakuru. I wanted to go back to sleep and pretend that this day wasn't happening. Do you really think that it is morning yet? I asked, because apart from the moon, which is big and bright, the sky is as black as burnt sausages, and all the other birds are still asleep. I can hear them snoring. It must be morning, he said. We slept for ages and ages. Are you trying to sleep in, Marcus? No, I said, lying. Lawrence yawned and lowered his head for me to crawl up onto the back of his neck. Reluctantly, I climbed on. He flew up into the burnt sausage sky. The darkness made it easier for me to see. It was like being underground. The air was cool on my worm skin. Maybe, I thought, I can pretend that I'm navigating to Africa, but instead I'll just lead us back home, and then act surprised when we get there. That should be doable. It didn't take us that long to get to Paris. I'm sure that I'll remember the way back if I see a few familiar landmarks. I scanned the darkened countryside, looking for things that I recognized. I could see a big tree. I definitely remember flying over a tree on the way here. Fly to that tree on your left, Lawrence, I shouted out. Immediately after the tree, there was a field with a horse sleeping in it. I was 100% sure that I'd seen a horse on the way here. Keep flying straight ahead over the field. We flew for a bit, and then Lawrence started to drop quite unexpectedly. Are we landing? I asked. No, he answered. He must have been a bit sleepy, like me. This was going to be so easy. I could probably navigate with my eyes closed. I closed my eyes and yawned loudly. Are you still sleepy? Asked Lawrence. Yes, I said, are you? A little bit. I'm going to take a nap, I said, forgetting that I was supposed to stay awake. That's a good idea. Night-night, said Lawrence. I should have known that something was up. One minute I was flying with Lawrence in the burnt sausage sky, and the next moment we were both lying on some red, dusty soil in the heat of the sun. Lawrence was sleeping and making whistling noises from his beak. A zebra was sniffing around his head. Wake up, Lawrence, I whispered loudly. Lawrence opened his eyes and rubbed them with his wings. He saw the zebra, made a high-pitched scream, picked me up in his beak, and flew up into a tall tree. The zebra looked up at us. She swished her tail and then turned and nibbled on a piece of dry grass. "That horse looks just like a zebra," Lawrence squeaked. "Yes, and that giraffe looks just like a giraffe," I said, pointing at a giraffe who was tearing at the leaves of the branch that we were sitting on. "Where are we?" Lawrence said with a gasp. I looked around. There were 4 giraffes loitering around our tree. It was unlikely that we were back home. The only place where I'd seen these kind of animals was in Lawrence's Africa book. Maybe we were in Africa. Maybe I had directed Lawrence to Africa in my sleep. That must be what had happened. We actually made it to Africa. A surge of excitement rushed through my worm body, not because we were in Africa, but because I had discovered that I could sleep navigate. What else could I do? Perhaps I was also a virtuoso sleep trumpet player or the world's greatest sleep bricklayer. Lawrence interrupted my daydreaming. "Marcus, I think that I flew us to Africa in my sleep. I can sleep fly." "Really?" I asked, marvelling that we had both discovered sleeping talents at the same time. "Yes, you told me to fly over a tree and then over a field. After that you didn't say anything for a long time. When I was waiting for your next direction, I must have fallen asleep. I might have been flying for days, or even weeks, or even years. And now look, this looks very much like the Masai Mara National Reserve in Kenya. I can't believe that you knew the way and that I flew us here." "I can't believe it either," said Lawrence. I had a feeling inside my body that I never experienced before. It was like a million happy butterflies were fluttering their wings while singing a pleasant song. I wasn't even worried about how we would get home. I could probably figure that out while taking an afternoon nap. It was Lawrence's dream to travel here, and together, without even trying, we'd actually done it. While dreaming. Chapter 9. "Do you speak English?" Lawrence was shouting at the giraffe. The giraffe looked at us with her very big eyes. "Could you give us a ride?" he said slowly, this time doing a little mime. The giraffe smiled and lowered her head so that we could climb on. She circled one of the tall trees with Lawrence and me balancing on her head. Lawrence turned and looked at me. "This is great, isn't it?" It really was. I'd never even dreamed of travelling, but now here I was, balancing on a giraffe's head in Kenya. Beyond the trees, behind a low fence, there were lots of children with their mums and dads. They were all pointing and laughing and having fun. The giraffe lowered her long neck to the ground, and Lawrence and I hopped off. "Thank you very much," he shouted, doing a bow to show how grateful he was. "Are you all right, Marcus?" Lawrence asked. "Your skin, it looks a little dry." I'd been enjoying myself on the giraffe so much that I hadn't noticed that my body was shrivelling in the dry heat of the sun. I tried to answer Lawrence, but couldn't move my mouth to speak. "We'd better find some mud for you to cool off in." Lawrence picked me up in his beak and flew over some bushes and trees. "There's a swamp," he said, forgetting that I was in his beak, and accidentally plopped me head first into the mud, which was cold and gloopy, like thick, dark chocolate frosting on a birthday cake. I sank to the bottom, and it felt totally wonderful. I heard Lawrence call to me with a muffled voice. "Everything okay down there?" "Fine and dandy," I said, emerging from the swamp and feeling like new again. A big pig-like creature watched me wriggle out of my muddy bath. "Hello, Piggy," I said, trying to be friendly, just in case he thought I was a chocolate-covered snack. He snorted in my direction, giving me a shower that washed away the mud. "Thanks, Piggy," I said, keeping the conversation going just in case he now thought I was some kind of savoury snack. "That's not a pig. It's a pygmy hippo," said Lawrence, who was reading a sign. "I must say, it's very organised here at the Masai Mara with these informative signs." There were signs everywhere, and there were also neat paths edged with little fences. It did look quite different from Lawrence's Africa books. Lawrence must have been thinking the same thing. "It's not how I imagined it would be here. he said, hopping along a path. "I do like it. It's very tidy. In my safari books there were a lot more open spaces and dusty plains. It seemed more natural." "I said it before, and I'll say it again, Lawrence. That's progress for you." Lawrence nodded. "That must be what it is." I remembered that I was great at navigating, and I had the butterflies in my tummy feeling again. "Lawrence," I said a little too enthusiastically. "Yes?" "Let's go and find that Lake Nakaroo. It can't be far from here." Lawrence gasped. We can meet the flamingos," I said. His eyes lit up. I wondered whether I needed to be asleep to find the way, or whether I might be able to find it just by using my worm instincts. "Maybe one of these signs will direct us to the lake," Lawrence said, hopping speedily along the path. "Ooh, there's a map here as well," he called out. "Can you come and look at it?" Silly Lawrence, he had obviously forgotten that I don't need a map to navigate. "Psst," said the pygmy hippo. "If you're looking for the flamingos, they live in the middle of the lake on the other side of the giraffe's house." He lifted his head to point out the direction to go. "Thank you very much," I said. Even though he told me the way, I probably could have figured it out with my natural worm instincts. The hippo gave me another spray of water. It lifted me along the path like a water slide. This water spraying thing was probably a local custom. I filled my cheeks with water from a puddle and sprayed him back. It didn't have quite the same impact, but hopefully he appreciated the gesture. I rejoined Lawrence, who looked like he was using all of his bird brain to try and understand the map. "Come on," I said. "I'm the navigator." I jumped up onto his back without waiting for him to lower his neck. I missed and slid down the side of his wing. Lawrence picked me up with his beak and threw me onto my usual seat. We flew up past the tall building, over some lions and a group of penguins. In geography class at Worm School, we learned that penguins lived in cold countries. Why were there penguins here in Africa? Maybe they were on safari. That was probably it. "Oh, look, there are kangaroos over there," said Lawrence, as we flew over a big hill. "I didn't expect to see kangaroos here. I thought they only lived in Australia." "They're on vacation," I said confidently. "They're on the same safari as the penguins." "Oh, I see," Lawrence answered. Just then I could see something glistening in the distance. "Lawrence, there it is. It's over there. I can see it. We've made it. It's Lake Nakaroo." We landed at the edge of the lake next to some tall trees. To celebrate this moment, Lawrence was singing a song. I think it was a song. I didn't recognize the tune or the words, but he looked like he was enjoying the strange noises that were coming from his beak. I was about to do a happy dance when, from the corner of my eye, I saw a squirrel. It was a familiar-looking squirrel. It looked just like the one with the awful teeth, who was friends with the evil mole. I had a funny feeling in my belly. Chapter 10. "What are you looking at?" Lawrence asked. The squirrel had darted away, and I was staring at an empty branch. "Do you remember that squirrel from before?" "Oh, yes," said Lawrence, doing a weird body shake. "That was when we were almost a stew." "I think that I just saw her, Lawrence." "Why would she be here in Africa?" Lawrence asked. "You must have imagined it." "Yes," I said, laughing. I laughed even though it wasn't funny. I looked up at the tree again to double-check. No squirrels. It must have been my silly imagination. I turned back to Lawrence. He was staring straight ahead with his beak open. He looked like he'd just seen something spectacular, like a unicorn or a pile of nachos with cheese on top. "What is it?" I asked, looking to see if there was a unicorn or cheesy nachos. "It's them, my flamingo family," he said, with a soft, crackly voice. There they are. They're the flamingos at Lake Nakaroo. Lawrence was looking at a small group of pink birds with long, thin legs who were standing on an island in the middle of the lake. A tear was rolling down his cheeks. They really were flamingos. We stood in silence, watching them from a distance. We stared at them for so long that I started to wonder if the flamingos were actually real. They were bright pink with unusual beaks and legs that looked like twigs. Maybe they were made out of plastic and twigs. Then one of the flamingos gracefully bent down, scooped a fish out of the water, and gulped it down. "I think they are real," I said out loud. Lawrence sighed. "This is where I belong. It's my true home. I can't believe that we actually made it here," he said, staring ahead. I couldn't believe it either. I looked at Lawrence and then at the flamingos and then at Lawrence again. He still looked like a chicken, a little fat round one. I thought about telling him. Maybe he hadn't noticed. But then I remembered about trying to be kind, and that in Lawrence's mind he was a flamingo. It was probably best to try and support Lawrence in whatever he believed. That's probably what a friend would do. "I've always dreamed of meeting other flamingos, and now it's finally happening," Lawrence continued. "I'm one of them." "Yes, you are," I said, lying to Lawrence. "Shall we go and meet them?" Lawrence asked. "Yes," I said. We flew to the island in the lake and landed next to a small group of flamingos. I couldn't help staring at their legs. Up close they looked even more like twigs. Lawrence must have been taking a good look as well, because one of the flamingos said to him rudely, "What are you staring at, little bird?" "All of you," he said boldly, pushing his chest out. I think he was trying to make himself look a little taller. "My companion and I," Lawrence said in a formal voice, "have travelled many, many miles from a distant land to meet all of you." He extended his wing to include me in the conversation. He sounded and looked a little like the Queen of England. I cleared my throat and sat up straight to appear more regal. He continued, "All of my life I've dreamed of meeting flamingos and finding true friendship, happiness, and a sense of belonging. Now that time has come. As you can probably tell, I am a flamingo, and it is my honour to be reunited with all of you, my brothers and my sisters." Lawrence's speech was actually pretty good. The flamingos didn't say anything at first. They looked at us with their beaks open. I had a feeling that they might not be very friendly. I was right, because then something horrible happened. A small flamingo with a scratchy voice started laughing. It wasn't the type of nice laugh that you get when children are running around in a beach, splashing in the waves. No, it was a cruel, mocking sound. It made my skin hurt. All of the other flamingos joined in. I wanted Lawrence and me to be somewhere else, far away from these horrible birds. I imagined us being in Paris on a tandem bicycle with 2 freshly baked baguettes in the front basket. That made me happy, being somewhere else. And then I remembered again that I can't ride a bicycle. I felt sad. Normally in a situation like this, I would have found an excuse to wriggle away, but because I was with Lawrence and he was standing there like a bronze statue with his beak wide open in shock, I had to stand there as well and try to be supportive. The first flamingo lowered his head to Lawrence's level and whispered, "You're not one of us. You're just a common plain bird. No one is interested in your type." He and his friends turned their back on us, and they walked away on their twigs. I couldn't believe how rude he was. I felt really angry. I wanted to do something that would make a difference. I powered up my worm brain to think of something that would help Lawrence. "Should I go and hit him?" I asked. "No, don't do that," Lawrence said. I was glad, because I never hit anyone before. That was another thing that they didn't teach us in worm school. As I stood there feeling like a tiny helpless worm, I remembered Robert the Bruce. Well, not Robert, but the spider who inspired him to never give up. If that spider were here now, he'd probably tell me to go and stand up for Lawrence. With that in mind, I wriggled over to the group of flamingos and said in my boldest voice, "And what do you think you're doing?" The flamingos turned to look at me. They looked confused. I said, "What do you think you're doing?" The flamingos looked at the ground with sullen faces, suddenly ashamed. I couldn't believe that they were listening to me. I felt as big as a tall building. That's me, and that's the tall building. "We're not doing nothing," mumbled the one with the scratchy voice. "You're not doing anything," I said, correcting his grammar while wiggling slowly and deliberately in a circle around the 4 of them. "What's he doing?" asked a flamingo with a big beak, who was now looking pretty worried. "I heard the way that you spoke to this bird, Lawrence." Lawrence flew and stood by my side. "You flamingos have been very rude and disrespectful to him." One of the flamingos looked up for a moment, her face full of indignation. "I want you to apologise," I said. The birds crossed their wings and huffed and muttered under their breaths. "I'm not going to apologise," one of them mumbled. "Now," I said, pretending that I was as big as a skyscraper. "Sorry, Lawrence," they said in unison. That was good, I thought. I liked being a skyscraper. "And why are you sorry?" "For being rude and disrespectful," they all said together. "That's right." "Can we go now?" asked the flamingo with the big beak. "No, I want you to say to Lawrence, 'You are a flamingo. You are the best flamingo of us all.'" There was silence. "But he's not actually a flamingo," said the small flamingo cautiously. "I don't care if he's a flamingo or not. I just want you to say it and make my friend happy." Lawrence cleared his throat and put his wing in the air. "Yes, Lawrence." "I think maybe," he said softly, "I'm not a flamingo." His voice went up at the end like he was asking a question, even though he wasn't. "I may have made a mistake. I thought I was a flamingo, but now that I'm here and they're here, I can see that we look just a little bit different. I think that maybe we're different types of birds." He was whispering so quietly that all of us had to lean in to hear what he was saying. "Do you still want us to say that he's a flamingo?" asked the flamingo with the scratchy voice. "No, you may be dismissed," I said loudly. "Thank you very much," they replied, and turned around. "Goodbye, and remember," I said without finishing my sentence. They stopped and turned their heads. I made them wait a while before continuing. "Be good." They all nodded and continued on their way, wading through the lake. Lawrence picked me up, and we flew to a bench by some tall trees. "What was that all about?" he asked in a high-pitched, giggling voice. "What?" I said, feeling my worm-like self returning. "You were like a different worm. I've never seen you act like that before." "I was inspired by a spider, and I pretended that I was big as a tall building." "Oh," said Lawrence, who seemed to understand, and then looked like he really didn't know what I was talking about. "Whatever it was," he said, "thanks for sticking up for me. You're really kind." He put his wing on my back to show his appreciation. I felt another feeling that I'd never felt before. It was as if somebody had opened a bottle of soda inside my head. My face felt fizzy. "Are you embarrassed?" Lawrence asked. "Your cheeks have gone a strange colour." "I like gherkins because they look like dinosaur toes," I said, trying to change the subject. "I don't like mustard, though, because it tastes like fire." It was overwhelming having so many feelings all at once. "What are you talking about?" "I don't like mustard," I said. "Oh, but mustard's really good. How can you not like it?" asked Lawrence, taking his wing away from my back. "Mustard is the worst. It's like eating a—" I stopped in mid-sentence. From the corner of my eye I could see that squirrel again. It was her, the one with the terrible teeth, and she was beatboxing. P't, 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 p't. Chapter 11. "What is she doing here at Lake Nakaroo?" asked Lawrence. He'd taken another sandwich from his feathers and was eating and speaking with his beak full. He offered me half, but it had mustard on it, and as I said before, I don't really like mustard. "Maybe she's on safari with the kangaroos." We watched her beatboxing and dancing. "I taught her how to do that," I said. "She must have practiced, because she's much better than she was before." The squirrel was doing cartwheels in a circle and full backward body spins in the air. The humans loved it. They were laughing and making kissy noises so that she would look at them. Every now and again she would stop dancing and scamper over to a person, and they would give her a peanut. "I've had another thought," I said with dread. "Maybe they're following us, her, the mole, and that crow, and they're going to put us in the cooking pot after all." "I think she's just on vacation," said Lawrence firmly. "She looks too relaxed to be up to any mischief." Lawrence looked over his shoulder just in case. The squirrel saw us. She stopped her acrobatic dance and beatboxing routine. Then she smiled a toothy grin while forward flipping over to us. I wondered if Lawrence had packed any peanuts in his feathers. "Quick," said Lawrence, "let's get out of here." "Marcus, wait!" the squirrel called out. "I need to say something." She remembered my name, and she almost sounded warm and friendly. That was confusing. Lawrence must have been confused too. He had me dangling from his beak and was standing in a take-off position ready to fly away. He waited for her to say something else. I just want to thank you both of you for teaching me how to dance, she said. OK, said Lawrence, dropping me from his beak onto the ground. I wish that he would remember that he can't speak and hold me in his beak at the same time. We can be friends if you like. My name is Jennifer Peggy, or JPEG for short.
Said Lawrence nervously.
JPEG continued. Before meeting you, I was scrawny and hungry all the time. Then you two came and taught me how to beatbox and dance, and it meant that I could move here. Humans give me tons of peanuts to reward me for my routines. I'm not hungry anymore, thanks to you. She did look much healthier now.
Oh,
Lawrence started patting his feathers down like he was looking for something.
We don't seem to have any peanuts with us, but please take this, he said, offering her half his cheese and mustard sandwich. You must have been so hungry to travel all this way just to get a few peanuts, you poor thing.
JPEG looked confused, but she gratefully took the sandwich. Thank you very much. That's kind of you. She looked up at us with a remorseful expression on her face. I'm sorry about what happened with the stew before and with the others. I didn't really want to eat you. I was just hungry.
That's okay, said Lawrence, quickly passing her the rest of the sandwich. We wouldn't want you to go without any food.
JPEG gave us a big smile, and even though she had awful teeth, she looked beautiful. She put the sandwich in her mouth and scuttled up a big tree. When she got to the top branch, she waved at us. Lawrence waved back to her.
I didn't expect to see her here,
he said. I nodded in agreement.
Oh, will you look at that, said Lawrence, putting his wing around my shoulder. I can see my neighbours from home, over there, eating ice cream.
He waved at them as well, and they waved back.
Marcus, it's like we're living in a movie that is full of funny coincidences. This is such a great movie.
Something didn't feel quite right. So far we'd seen JPEG, the kangaroo, some penguins, and there in front of us were Lawrence's neighbours. They couldn't be on safari. They couldn't all be on safari. And another funny thing was that no matter where we were in the world, everyone spoke perfect English. In worm school they taught us languages so that we could speak to worms from other countries. It took me forever to learn Mandarin. Lawrence, do you think that perhaps we might not be at Lake Nakuru after all?
Of course we are,
Lawrence answered hastily. He took his wing off my shoulder.
Whatever in the world makes you think that we're anywhere but Lake Nakuru?
Hello, Lawrence, said one of Lawrence's neighbours. He had hopped over to join us.
Bernard, hello,
said Lawrence, who was beginning to sweat now. Would you like some of my ice cream? Bernard asked.
No, thank you. Are you on safari, Bernard?
No, he said, taking a lick from his ice cream.
Oh,
said Lawrence. He looked around.
Bernard?
Yes?
We are in Lake Nakuru, aren't we?
No, Lawrence, we're at the zoo, said Bernard casually.
The zoo? Oh, is it a zoo at Lake Nakuru?
No, said Bernard. It's a zoo that's 10 minutes from where we live.
Really, said Lawrence.
He thought for a moment.
But it can't be, because we've been flying for days to get here. We even flew past the Eiffel Tower in Paris, which must mean that we're in Africa now. And we've seen lots of wild animals as well. The kinds of animals that only live in Africa.
I'm not sure why it took you days to get here, Lawrence, Bernard said, taking another lick from his ice cream. Maybe you came the long way round, through Paris, or, he said, tipping his head to one side to think. It could be that the Eiffel Towers you saw were the transmission towers. They sort of look like the Eiffel Tower. Transmission towers are used to carry electricity, and there are lots of them near where we live. And as for the animals, well, you get all kinds of animals in a zoo.
I thought we were in Kenya, said Lawrence, looking as though he might cry.
Well, maybe we are. I'll check, said Bernard. I think he was trying to make Lawrence feel better. Tonya, he shouted.
Yes,
asked Tonya. She was eating strawberry ice cream, and there were drips of it all around her beak. Are we in Kenya?
No, Bernard, we're at the zoo. Why?
Just checking, said Bernard. Sorry about that, Lawrence. We are at the zoo. Are you sure you don't want some of this ice cream? He put the cone under Lawrence's beak. Lick, lick. Lawrence took the cone. Instead of taking one lick, which was what Bernard was offering, he slowly ate the whole thing while staring into space. Crunch, crunch. Bernard watched Lawrence with his beak open. If you need to get home, he said, Just fly over these trees and keep going straight. You'll see the Eiffel Towers, and after 2 more fields, you'll get to our tree." "Thank you," said Lawrence, looking at the ground. "And another thing, we come here all the time. You can come with us on the next visit if you like." "Thank you," said Lawrence, still looking at the ground. Bernard hopped back to the others. They were talking and looking over at us in between licks of their ice cream, except for Bernard, who didn't have any ice cream. Chapter 12. Lawrence and I were sitting on the ground. I couldn't believe it. We had just been flying around in giant circles the whole time, going nowhere. I thought I knew how to navigate in my sleep, and Lawrence thought he had learned how to sleep fly. There was a moment when both of us felt on top of the world, where anything was possible with our shared secret genius skills, but it turned out that we were both still as useless as when we had first met. The whole experience had been a total waste of time. Lawrence was probably really depressed now. It was my job to try and think of something helpful and supportive to say. I couldn't think of anything. "Do you have any sandwiches with pickled onions left?" I asked. Lawrence rummaged in his feathers with his wing, looking for extra sandwiches. "No, I gave the last sandwich to that squirrel because I thought she'd walked all the way to Lake Nakaroo for a peanut." Without meaning to, I laughed. Lawrence looked at me. "It's not funny," he said. Then he started laughing. I'm not sure why, but neither of us could stop laughing, and people stopped to look at us. Lawrence wheezed and thumped the ground with his wing. "And we've just been flying in circles for days," he said. "And then, when we got here and saw the flamingos, they were really rude." "They were so rude," I said in between laughing fits. "I can't believe that you wanted to be a flamingo. No, I can't believe that you thought you were a flamingo." "But I do look like a flamingo," Lawrence said. I laughed so much at this that I thought my stomach might explode. "You don't look anything like a flamingo," I said. "You look like a chicken." I was bent over double, but when I finally finished laughing, I noticed that Lawrence had stopped laughing a while ago. "Do you think I look like a chicken?" he asked seriously. "No, you don't, Lawrence," I said, suddenly worried that I might have hurt his feelings. "Well, you do sort of look like a chicken." Then I got annoyed. "What's wrong with looking like a chicken? All of your neighbours look like chickens, and there's nothing wrong with them. I don't know why you want to be something different. You're great just as you are." "Am I?" he asked. I just said something nice to Lawrence without thinking about it in advance. Was Lawrence really great? "Yes, you're great, Lawrence," I said. "Oh," he said. I wasn't used to having conversations like this. I waited for him to change the subject, but then, suddenly, tons of words came out of my mouth. "It doesn't matter that you look like a little round chicken. What matters is that you are kind. You could have eaten me for breakfast, but you didn't. You told me about your dream to fly to Lake Nakaroo, and then you took me there. Sort of. I was scared at first, and only agreed to come because I didn't have any choice. But in the end it turned out to be much more fun than staying at home, digging holes in the mud. I prefer being with you to digging holes in the mud, Lawrence." Lawrence didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "That's the nicest thing that anyone's ever said to me." I felt a warm glow. I'd said something nice without even trying, or lying. Lawrence looked at me and said, "I thought I'd only be happy if I moved to Lake Nakaroo in Kenya and made friends with flamingos. But these last few days I've been happier than I've ever been before. I'm not in Kenya, and I'm not a flamingo, but I didn't need to be a flamingo. I just needed a friend, and you're my friend." "Thank you, friend." "That's okay, friend," I said. This conversation was getting to be too much for me. I had that soda in the head feeling again. I was too embarrassed for us to look at each other, and I was beginning to feel dizzy and sick. We both stared straight ahead. A pigeon was standing on a sandwich that had fallen to the ground. He pecked at it hurriedly before any of the other pigeons spotted it. It was an egg salad sandwich. "Do you want to come to my house for dinner later?" Lawrence asked. "What will you be making?" I asked. I wondered what the pigeon would be having for dinner. Maybe it would be another sandwich. "Mashed potatoes?" "Mashed potatoes are one of my favourites." "Yes, please, Lawrence," I said. Chapter 13. It didn't take us 3 days to fly back from Lake Nakaru National Park to Lawrence's house, but it might have if Tonya had not spotted us as we took off. We had been about to fly in the wrong direction. Tonya ended up coming over for dinner, and Lawrence invited his neighbours Lizzie, Bernard and Shakira, and that pigeon. His name was Sebastian. Lawrence wasn't used to having dinner parties. He started panicking in the kitchen and then ended up making too many mashed potatoes. The extra potatoes was enough to make a mashed potato bed. Lawrence slept in it that night and said it was the most comfortable bed in the world. When I met Lawrence for the first time, he had his beak wide open ready to eat me. I didn't stop to wonder if he might be kind and thoughtful and have a penchant for cheese and mustard sandwiches. No, I just wanted to get as far away as I could from that beaky fluff ball. I was perfectly content with my life hidden under the ground, digging worm tunnels in the dark. And when Lawrence met me, he didn't stop to wonder if I might be the sort of worm who would care about the things that he cared about. No, he just saw a tasty breakfast. We were very lucky that we'd had a conversation about our hobbies. If it hadn't been for that, then we wouldn't have discovered that we could do things together that were impossible on our own. With Lawrence, I can fly. Woohoo! And if Lawrence hadn't met me, he would probably still be at home, sitting on a sofa like a blob of mashed potatoes and thinking about his dreams, but not doing anything about them. All of his life he had dreamed about faraway places. It was only when he met me and we left his birdhouse for Lake Nakaru that he became a courageous adventurer. In the end, we didn't make it to Lake Nakaru, or to France, or even further than 3 miles away from the birdhouse. But we did have an adventure. We discovered those transmission towers, and that was probably just as good as seeing the Eiffel Tower. We escaped from a cooking pot and rode a giraffe. Lawrence did a dance in front of everyone without worrying about what anyone thought about him. He even rescued a worm, Gwynder, who didn't really want to be rescued, but it was the thought that counted. I chanted in a circle with weird worms while wearing a hat made out of twigs on my head, and we both slept out under the burnt sausage sky, sharing an itchy blanket. One of my favourite things about Lawrence is that I can tell him the thoughts in my head and he doesn't say, "What a ridiculous idea," or anything awful like that. The other day I told him about how sometimes I daydream about riding a bicycle with a freshly baked baguette in the front basket. He didn't say anything. I thought that he'd fallen asleep, but he hadn't, because the very next day he came to my house with a big surprise. He had an actual bicycle for me, with a basket on the front. It wasn't even my birthday. I love it so much. I did try to ride it, but it's pretty hard riding a bicycle when you're a worm. So, to help me out, Lawrence rides it, and I sit in the basket and pretend to be a freshly baked baguette. Sometimes JPEG the squirrel comes to visit, and she rides the bike, and Lawrence sits in the basket and pretends to be a baguette. Even though Lawrence is a bird and I am a worm, he doesn't see me as breakfast anymore. He sees me as his friend. I think that's why he doesn't seem to notice the things that I can't do well. He just sees the good things in me, things that even I don't always see. Maybe what he sees is the real me, the real Marcus. I don't know. But I do know that Lawrence is probably the kindest living bird on the planet, and he makes me want to try and be a better worm. It's hard for me to be as kind and nice as he is, and I keep doing it wrong. But then I remember Robert the Bruce and his unusual little friend, who happened to be a spider. I remember that if at first I don't succeed, then I should try again. Here's a picture of me and Lawrence flying. Here's some more pictures of me and Lawrence flying. That's the end. Thank you.